Hey son, and welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be doing another lore spotlight. Spotlight on a topic that I have discussed a few times before, but I thought would be interesting to go back to. One, because it's kind of a confusing topic anyway, and two, because it will actually segue me into a really nice story. It's one of those little stories, kind of like the story we heard about Malkor before, that a lot of people don't know about, but it is actually there in the lore and is quite an interesting story. It's the story about a character named Lord Audran, and that means the spotlight for today is on the Mist, which you probably already know because it's in the title there. Before we get started, the footage in the background is from the game Genes, so thank you very much to them. There's actually a 19-minute PvP video on their channel, I see, so maybe I could just use that for this if we get that long. But yeah, I want to talk about the Mists because they're kind of this bizarre thing that exists in the Guild Wars universe that is difficult even for me to wrap my head around, so a lot of other people I'm sure it will be quite confusing to them, though really it is quite a simple concept. It's just that as soon as you start looking at what the Mists are and start asking specific questions, all of a sudden it seems to become a lot more confusing. So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible, but explain all the stuff that we do know about them. The Mists are, just to put it really simply, like a magical realm that hangs over everything in the physical universe. It's like all over everywhere. It's a magical realm that kind of connects all places and all times in all of the Guild Wars universe, in all of the Guild Wars multiverse as they call it. So it's like this magical thing that you can, this other extra realm that you can go into and come back out of, and it will take you to different places, very far away places, very close places, and it's got all this stuff inside it that are kind of like realms of their own. So the Mists are, if you were to look at them, it seems at certain places in Guild Wars 1 that you know you're in the Mists and you look out into the distance across from wherever you're stood, they actually do look like mists. They look like just long planes of ever stretching out long clouds and mists just that go on forever and ever and ever. But within these mists, these literal physical mists, there are actual other realms, other areas of existence, and people will go to those. I mean, the main ones really are the realms of the afterlives. So we know 100% for a fact that every single one of the human gods, which are real things in the Guild Wars universe, they're not like things that the humans believe in but don't actually exist. They are real entities that exist in the universe. Whether all races define them as gods or not is another question, but they do all exist, and each of these powerful deities, or whatever you want to call them, or whatever you view them as, each of these things has got a realm that exists within the Mists that they lord over and that essentially belongs to them. In Guild Wars 1 we found 3 of these realms, okay, that exist within the Mists. One of them was Grenth's realm, which is known as the Underworld. One of them is Balthazar's realm, known as the Fissure of Woe, and one of them was Abaddon's realm, or now Cormyr's realm, which, while Abaddon was in charge, was known as the Realm of Torment, and it was being used as his prison essentially, and then he corrupted it and turned it to do his own bidding essentially. Or now it's known as the Redeemed realm, and that's where Cormyr now lords over. Those were 3 realms we saw and went to in Guild Wars 1. We know that Dwayna's got a realm of her own, and we know that perhaps the Tengu believe in this same realm as well. They're calling it the sky above the sky. We're kind of thinking of it as eternal paradise, and we know it's very likely that the other gods have got their own realms too. For example, Lissa, the developers of Guild Wars 1 a long time ago now, did talk about how they once had plans for a real realm to exist in Guild Wars 1, like an extra mission, if you will, that was going to be added to the game that would let you go to Lissa's realm. So in lore, all of the gods do have their own realms. The most interesting of these realms really is Grenth's. Grenth is a judge, and what happens when you die is eventually you will find your way first through the Mists, out of the physical world. You'll die and your spirit will go into the Mists, and it will go to Grenth in the Underworld. And the Underworld is really a staging ground, if you will, and from there Grenth will look at everything you did in your life and he will judge you, and he will decide which other afterlife, which other realm within the Mists you go to, and then you will either stay in the Underworld if you did specific things in life, or you'll move on to another area. So the Underworld is quite an interesting one in that a lot of spirits will end up there in the Underworld first and then they'll move on. There was a lot of lore that was established in Guild Wars 1 about how exactly the souls of the dead found their way to the Underworld. For example, we found out that there was this massive river, this river of souls, that actually flowed through Abaddon's realm. It flowed through the Realm of Torment and then eventually through the Mists into the Underworld. So you can actually see that there are connections between these different realms within the Mists. So they are connected connected in some physical way, I suppose you can say. And there are other areas of the Underworld as well that seem to be very closely related or tied to the realm of torment as well. So that's kind of the idea here. We've got the mists, which are this massive, all-encompassing extra realm, this extra thing that hangs over everything, and within it there are these other realms or areas of afterlife. And when Guild Wars 2 was being developed, we had a fantastic quote from the developers that said that the mists resonate from the worlds around them, forming bits of their own reality. Islands of existence that reflect the history of their world. So what this essentially means is that the mists will look at what happens in the physical world, the real world. You know, Tyria is a planet, essentially, and it's got a sun and there's stars in the sky. There is a physical world just like we know in the real life. But these mists that kind of hang over all of this physical world will begin to imitate and replicate things and change and adapt or reflect from what is happening in the physical world too. So this is kind of possibly how these actual afterlives that exist in the mists ended up coming to be. But I say that, you know, when Guild Wars 1 first came out, we also had a description about the mists, which came from the official manuscripts that read, before there were humans or dwarves, and remember dwarves are a very ancient race, before there were even worlds or the stars that light the night sky, there was but one thing in the universe, the mists. The mists touch all things. They are what binds the universe together, past, present, and future. They are the source of all good and evil, of all matter and knowledge. It is said that all forms of life, no matter how simple or complex, can trace their origins back to this one place. So while the mists actually reflect and resonate the actual physical worlds that exist in the universe, it can also be said that that physical universe was only created from the mist in the first place. The mists create everything. That's where everything came from, right? And you can see a paradox there, right? It's like, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg, the mists or the physical world? And I think that's a deliberate thing the writers have written in there. This whole idea, this whole concept is supposed to be somehow ambiguous, and that's what I'm talking about when I say try not to ask too many questions, because it's supposed to be this magical thing we couldn't really 100% comprehend. And I actually like that they've written this into the story. I think some people might scoff at something like that and say, oh, it's just that the writers haven't written the story out for themselves and they've got a loose shambles of a world or a shambles of a universe and poorly defined lore. But I actually think they've done this on purpose here. And I think there is a place in fantasy games for that bit of mystery to be there that we can't 100% work out, because really that's what makes a lot of the game fun, and that's why we can have our own theories and things. So that's essentially what the mists are on the whole. They have all of these realms within them, and they, as it says here, touch all things. Now, one thing I haven't told you about the mists is that even though they're kind of this thing that you wouldn't expect to have a center or an edge, they're just kind of all over everything and like circling around on themselves and just all encompassing on their own. There is actually a place that exists in the heart of the mists, in the very center of the mist. There is something, and this is called the Rift. You know how I said that if you go into the mists, you can use those mists to get anywhere you want in the physical world? Well, to do that, you have to travel through that place in the very center. It's called the Rift. Here's the description we got when Prophecies first came out, because it's going to explain it far better than I can. In the middle of the mists is a spot where time moves neither forward nor back. It is a tear in the fabric of the cosmos, the point of perfect balance between all forces of the universe. This place is known as the Rift, and there's nothing to which it does not connect, nothing that cannot be reached from inside it. Those who have the know-how to travel across the universe through the mists must pass through the Rift on their way to all other places. It is the center of all things. So the way I look at the Rift, I kind of think of it as the eye of the hurricane. If the mists were the hurricane, this is the very center. This is where everything somehow, inexplicably, all goes through, and through everything must pass. All events, all places, all times, they all convene in this one spot in the center, and everything kind of resonates out of that. So if you were a character on the Tyria world, if you lived in Tyria, let's say you're at Norn, and you've decided to yourself, right, I want to go and travel to another world. I want to go to a different place. I'm sick of Tyria, and I'm going to do that by going through the mists. You would do whatever you had to do to get into the mist, which we'll talk about in a second. And once you are in the mist, you would have to come through the Rift here. You'd have to go through this center place where neither time moves forward nor back, and everything is crazy, and everything's like a standstill, and yet everything's moving through all at the same time. And then from there, you can get to wherever you want, any time, any place, and then you would pop out the other side, and that's that. There is the question as to whether whether you have to go through the rift to get to the various realms that exist within the mists, so the Underworld and the Fissure of Woe and stuff. If you're in the Underworld, therefore, do you have to then go through the rift to get to the Fissure of Woe or to the Realm of Torment, other realms? I would actually say you don't, simply because we know this river kind of exists and there do seem to be connections, physical connections between these places. But maybe that's wrong. You could still explain that maybe somehow you have to go through the rift for absolutely everything, even these afterlives that exist within the mists, which is an interesting idea. Anyway, that's the heart of the mist, the rift. And what do you know? There's something in the heart of the rift as well. In the very middle of the rift, in the middle of the eye of the hurricane, there's something else. There is another realm, okay? This realm is known by the humans as the Hall of Heroes. That's what the humans call it. And you could go there in Guild Wars 1 and it looked amazing. It was this giant structure, essentially, made of gold with all these beautiful courtyards and shiny, pristine streets and just this fantastic, amazing big fortress in the middle of there, and it was the Hall of Heroes. This is the place that is reserved. It's an afterlife, just like the other places are in the mists, but it is in the very center of even the rift. It's like the most important place. In fact, here's the description of the Hall of Heroes. In the center of the rift, deep inside the mists, stands the imposing walled fortress known across the multiverse as the Hall of Heroes. This structure is the pinnacle of the afterlife. When a hero dies, his spirit goes to one of two places. It's either buried with the deceased body, forever trapped inside the rotting flesh and rancid bones of the corpse, or it's released into the rift. This latter honour goes to only those few whose deeds in life were legendary enough to be known across multiple worlds, and fewer still earn a place among the souls ensconced inside the hall itself. Now, a couple of things to take away from this. That's what the Hall of Heroes is, basically. Not only the humans seem to believe in it, we actually heard from a Norn in Guild Wars 1, quite an important Norn to the story, in fact, a Norn called Jorah, who you'll see references to in Guild Wars 2. This woman, Jorah, talked to us at one point about how she believes the bravest of Norn heroes go to a place she was calling the Hall of Spirits, which sounds very similar to the Hall of Heroes, so that could be the Norn interpretation of the same place, which is quite cool. But that's actually what it is. It's this big walled fortress in the middle of the rift, which is in the middle itself of the mists. But there's this bit in the description of the Hall of Heroes here where it talks about how there are two things that happen to someone when they die, that either their spirit is just trapped within their body and it will just rot away with the flesh and the rancid bones of the corpse, or it will go into the mists. Now, when Prophecies was first released, there was a lot of lore that was written that seemed to establish that this was the case, that most people would just die and their spirit would never go into any kind of afterlife. But as more campaigns were released, actually that seems to have been retconned slightly, and it does seem like pretty much everyone will go into the afterlife at some point anyway. So that is something to bear in mind and question maybe slightly where the lore is, in my opinion, a little bit weak, where on one hand, we've got some of these older sources that say that the spirits are mostly trapped with the bodies, but now we're kind of under the impression, and there's a lot of evidence that that doesn't actually happen. So that's something to bear in mind and to kind of play with for yourself and decide what you believe most. But that's the Hall of the Heroes, pretty much. It's this beautiful golden place. The architecture, by the way, looks very similar to architecture we saw also in a different area, Ontaria, the physical world in Guild Wars 1, that was actually this building created by the gods, which is also a very interesting idea as well, the Hall of Ascension. So I could talk about that in another episode, though. So anyway, that's actually the mists. That's pretty much what's going on with it. You've got the mists with their little realms and their afterlives inside it. Then in the middle of the mists themselves, you have the rift, and inside of the middle of the rift, you've got the Hall of Heroes. That's kind of the structure that's going on. You might be asking, how exactly do you get to the mists? I've just told you that the mists hang over everything, and there's this thing that you can access no matter where you are in the physical world. But how do you access it? Well, you need very special magic, it seems, and you need to be able to do certain things. The main way we were able to access these places properly in Guild Wars 1 was only with the aid of the gods. We would have to essentially pray to the gods, give them an offering of gold, funnily enough, and their avatar would provide us with the capabilities of getting into the mists and whatever afterlife it was we wanted to reach. So that's how you would do it primarily in Guild Wars 1. But there's a lot of lore that's established there are other ways to get into the mists. For example, I was talking, was it the last spotlight we were talking about, the Celestials? We heard about that sage that was also going to the mist to commune with the spirits that were now in their afterlives. And that was a very big part of factions. In fact, ritualists, that profession, lore about that profession in Guild Wars 1, essentially established that ritualists had a real ability for going into the mists, at least in some way, to pull spirits out of the Underworld in particular, that afterlife in particular, to do their bidding for them. So the ritualists had a knack for this, and also in Guild Wars 2, the main one really would be the Norn with the Have-Runs, who directly go into the mists and the spirit world to commune with the spirits that they believe in their religion. So they have their own means of getting in there as well. It is certainly possible to access the mists. There was another example we really heard of a human, a man, creating full portals that take us to the mist in a very similar way to the gods that we've seen the gods doing. Don't forget, Balthazar built that temple in Lion's Arch and actually created another portal for us in Guild Wars 2. That's how you're going to be getting to World versus World, which lies in the mists, is a realm within the mists in Guild Wars 2. That was Balthazar that made that portal. But we have got lore, and this is the story that I wanted to talk about a man named Lord Audran, many years ago, a human that learned how to, through whatever mastery of magic, create his own portals into the mist, and he decided he wanted to start using them himself to start traveling through the multiverse. And like I said, this is one of those cool stories that I don't think many people are aware of, mostly because it only comes from the Guild Wars manuscripts. It's a very Guild Wars 1 centric thing, and you might have missed. So I'm just going to read this story. It's about as long as the story of Malcor, and then I guess we can wrap this up about the mists. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about them. So yeah, anyway, right. Lord Audran. Using a spell of his own devising and the sacrifice of many souls, Lord Audran, a powerful arcanist who specialised in the study of temporal distortions, opened a portal that offered him access to the mists and eventually into the rift itself. So he's learned how to do this. It requires sacrifice of some kind, which is very similar to what we saw the Messart doing, though they weren't trying to open portals, they were trying to keep a portal to the mists shut, as we saw in the Fire Island chain. And that's actually something else quite important to note too, that there are certain areas on the physical world of Tyria that seem to, the gap between the physical world and the mist seems a lot thinner, like where the Messart were trying to close that portal, and like in the Deep, one of the elite missions in Factions, you seem to go into this cave where the difference between the physical world and the mist seemed very thin, and all these spirits were able to just walk, essentially find a way through the mist into the physical world again, and a particularly dangerous demon called Kanaxai seemed to be doing the exact same thing as well. So not only can people manipulate magic to try and get into the mist themselves, but there also seem to be just certain regions that, for whatever reason, maybe other people have been there before and caused magic that's weakened the barrier, but just are very close to the mist already in the first place. And there are a lot of those around in Tyria. There really are. You can see quite a few of them in Guild Wars 1. Anyway, Lord Audran found a way to access the mists and eventually into the Rift too. The spirits who'd given their lives to earn such access to the hallowed afterlife were outraged. They turned their fury upon the intruder, attacking Lord Audran with all their legendary collective might. But it had been hundreds of years since most of the spirits had interacted with the physical world, and none of them had ever done so in their shadow form. As powerful as they'd been in life, they could not harm the physical manifestation of the Wizard Lord. Not yet. He was untouchable here in the Land of the Dead, and he travelled freely through the Hall of Heroes. The reason why I say this story is quite old, we don't actually have an exact date of when this happened in the universe, but now we know well enough that if you are a mortal that goes into the mists, the things that exist there now can very much harm you. So Lord Audran was really one of the first trespassers into the mist. They're very used to it now, and they're happy to tear your throat out if you're a mortal in the mist. They really are. Over the years, though, Lord Audran learned to use the rift to travel across the multiverse. He opened portals on nearly all of the different worlds, turning the rift into his own personal gateway. This line here is why I like this story so much. It's one of the only stories that gives us such explicit lore about something that happened on some of the other physical worlds in the Guild Wars universe. We know that there are other worlds out there, like for example the humans having been brought from those other worlds. We don't often hear anything more than that, but this is one of those occasions where we do know a human from Tyria, a man, Lord Audran, has actually been on these different worlds, and he did that by going through the mist, and there is the chance that we can do the same thing too. There was a very mysterious character in Nightfall, early game Nightfall, that was very hard to find, but he was named Baltek, and he also seemed to be one of these travellers of the mist that could potentially have gone to many different worlds. And don't forget as well, the mist span all times too. The rift is the centre of all times and places, so this also opens up the possibility of time travel, not just to the past and the future on Tyria, but on other worlds as well. This is kind of the scope we're looking at here. It really does allow you to go to lots of different places. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that the developers, the writers of Guild Wars, have tried to keep as many open doors as possible, because they can go in a lot of directions with the plot just from these kinds of open doors they've allowed themselves here. But though he was clever, The Wizard Lord himself was only mortal, and eventually the spirits of the Hall discovered a way to interact with corporal world. Audran's last physical journey through the rift cost him his mortal life. The Wizard Lord was torn to shreds by hundreds of angry souls seeking retribution for his trespasses. Notice here it keeps defining that it's when he lost his mortal life. Don't forget, he will have an immortal life once he's dead and he's a spirit, so there is the potential for us to meet this character in Guild Wars 2. When Audran's mortal body died, see, it clarifies it there again, the wards and enchantments that kept his portals that had been created in Tira hidden failed, and the gates to the Hall of Heroes were laid open to all who were able to find them. The Wizard Lord had been canny though. Audran knew that one day he too might be ensconced in the hall, so he hid his portals in the most treacherous locations he could find. The fear of death, he surmised, would keep the meek at bay. But a long time has passed, and it is now clear that the Wizard Lord, like the gods before him, underestimated the greed of men. Over time, the whereabouts of the portals have been revealed. Though they remain difficult to get to, there are those with enough skill and enough bravery to reach them, and every day the numbers of intruders to the Hall of Heroes rises. So we have a situation now on Tyria where there are lots of hidden portals in very, very dangerous locations. The first one we were introduced to in Guild Wars Prophecies was at the bottom of a tomb to the primeval kings of Elona that had migrated north across the desolation into the Crystal Desert and died there. This is a part of the story of Chiraiosa. They died, and there was this really grand tomb there, the Tomb of Primeval Kings. And Audran came along to this tomb eventually and decided, oh hey, maybe I should put a portal at the bottom of this treacherous tomb. And that's exactly what he did. And he did that in many different places all over Tyria. We know about one of these portals actually exists in Ascalon, funnily enough, but you can never get there in game. So they are around in the world, and people have managed to get to them. This story was written to explain the lore behind a mechanic in Guild Wars 1 that was known as Heroes Ascent. This was a PvP tournament. Essentially, you would enter, and the idea was you and 7 other people would embark on this big long journey to try and get to the Hall of Heroes yourself. And every step of the way, you'd be fighting another PvP team until you owned the Hall of Heroes. So this story was written to explain that whole aspect of the gameplay, but obviously it added a lot to the lore here, and it explained and gave us one of in my opinion, the most fascinating stories about someone, a human that actually learned to travel around the mists, and how actually we can, as players, possibly interact with them in the future. A lot of the time, because the mists is such an abstract idea, it's very easy to start thinking, well, how does this relate to the game? What exactly does this mean? And to really forget. But here, this story is nice because it's an actual example of how the mists have affected someone that actually exists within the universe. So, yeah, and it's a cool story that I don't think many people know about. So there you go, guys. That is the mists. Hopefully you did, as I say, learn something from this. Those are the mists. That's how they work. That's how you get there. That's what's inside them. And that's how they might affect the gameplay. Of course, in Guild Wars 2, I should 100% clarify this. We will be going to the Mist, not the entire game takes place on physical Tyria. The two main ways we'll be going to the Rift is not the realms of the gods, as we were in Guild Wars 1, because that's a very human-centric thing. In Guild Wars 2, we will be going to the world versus world battlegrounds, where an internal war is waging. Why there's a war waging, we don't really know. There's not been any lore. I suppose the idea is just that it's the Mist, once again, imitating stuff that is happening on physical worlds. And we will also be able to go to the heart of the Mist, is what it's called. And from here, this is like the PvP lobby. And again, there's not much lore about why we're going there either. Just think of it as you're going to the mist, and you get to go to some of these areas where the mists are imitating the physical world. And the maps you'll go to in PvP are simply just the mist imitating and recreating historical battles and stuff like that. So, for example, one battle we knew about that happened on the physical Tyria was the Battle of Kylo that happened many years ago, many years before Guild Wars 2. But the mists, to this day, is still imitating and replicating that battle. And if you go play PvP, then you get to participate in it. It's a 5-on-5 match in essentially Kylo, this place in Ascalon, as it was hundreds of years ago. So there you go, guys. That's the Mist. I will stop rambling. I've been talking for long enough. If you've got any other ideas for spotlights in the future, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you tomorrow for mechanics. See you next time.